Sleep. It's a topic that has garnered so much attention in recent years, and yet there's still so much to understand. The influence on metabolism, the role of physical activity, how to counteract circadian disruptions, and so much more. Based on the downloads of sleep specialists that we've had on the show, like Dr. Meeta Singh, Dr. Chris Winter, and several others, this is a topic you love. And today, we're going to uncover even more about this central issue. Welcome to the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper, the co-founder of the Catalyst Coaching Institute, and today's guest is a clinical and translational scientist, a self-described sleep nerd, Dr. Josiane Broussard. She's an assistant professor at Colorado State University and the Division of Endocrinology, Metabolism and Diabetes at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. She's the director of the Sleep and Metabolism Laboratory, where her team is uncovering fascinating research. We're going to talk about a lot of it on all things sleep. She is also, we're excited to announce, one of the keynote speakers at the coaching event of the year, the Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium in Estes Park, Colorado this September. If you're a coach and you're not yet registered for the retreat, it is filling up fast. We're going to be capping it, and the housing is going to get tight very soon there on the campus. So all the details, including early registration and group discounts if you want to bring your team, are available under the retreat tab at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Or please email us anytime with questions. Email is results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Now it's time to wake up and be a catalyst with Dr. Josiane Broussard on the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. Dr. Broussard, it is a privilege to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Excited to have you at the retreat this fall, but let's talk sleep.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
It seems like you go back 10, 15 years, like we didn't want to sleep. I remember telling Susanna, I want to get my body to the point where I have a 3 as the first number on the clock when I wake up in the morning. And at the time, she just said, "You're a weirdo. I don't know why I married you." If you said that today, someone would just say, "Well, you're an idiot then. Like you're trying to get the least out of your life if you're actually going to take that strategy." Well, what happened? Why all of a sudden are we waking up to this is actually important, people?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's awesome that you're even saying that, because I don't, not everybody, I think, now really realizes how important.
Well, we're going to help.
Yay. Okay, awesome. Actually, like sleep research is still fairly new of a field. And so it's really been the last probably 2 decades or so that we've really started to realize that sleep is important for physical health. So before that, there was a lot of sleep research into memory and cognition and the effects of sleep loss on reaction time, like performance. There's this huge body of literature that links not getting enough sleep to fatal car crash numbers and medical errors. But really about 20 years ago is when people started saying, hey, wait a minute, this thing we spend a third of our lives doing is probably also important for physical, like body health. Yeah. And so that's where my research has really focused.
Yeah, it's so exciting. We've had several sleep researchers on. Everybody loves listening to them. You're going to take a little different perspective. So this is great timing. So a lot of your work centers on the metabolic effects of sleep and its influence on diabetes, obesity, some types of cancer. We'll dig into this a little bit more, but could you give us the 15,000-foot view on some of the things that maybe our listeners hear and they go, wait, what?
Yeah. I mean, you touched on it for sure, but essentially people who don't get enough sleep or sleep at the wrong time of day. So for example, people who do night shift work are at an increased risk for all of the diseases you said. So diabetes, obesity, kidney disease, some types of cancer, even bone loss. So really? There's this kind of and it's no, we don't know the mechanism. We don't know why the disease risk increases when you don't get enough sleep or you sleep at the wrong time. So that's really where a lot of my research focuses.
And are we narrowing it down? You said we're seeing, and I had not heard that before with bone loss. Are we seeing, we think it's tied to lack of restoration in terms of the, any clue, any tips that 5 years from now, you're going to be coming out with this great study and we're going to say, we heard her.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, hopefully some of the strategies we're looking into. So like one part of my research is what I just said, kind of trying to uncover the underpinnings of this disease risk. So like tissue specific, like what's happening at the cell itself that increases the risk. But then on the other hand, so what if we know why the risk is there? What are we going to do about it? Right. So that's the other side of my research, where we're trying to test strategies that, you can implement when the behavior is unavoidable. So, obviously you can't get enough sleep all the time. There are times when you just can't, or times when you can't sleep during your biological night. And so we're trying to test some of those strategies in the lab. So hopefully that's the research you'll see in a few years, is do some of these strategies work? But kind of back to your question about mechanism, sadly, I would say the more research we do, the more potential mechanisms become available to test. Yep. So I think, to be honest, I think most sleep researchers would really say like sleep is touching every physiological process. And so the mechanism, there's never going to be one mechanism probably that underlies that disease risk.
Okay. And I do definitely want to get into some of the practical stuff, because that's what people help me sleep better. Like that's what we're really looking for here. Before we do that, you've done a lot of research on circadian rhythms, circadian cycles. Can you explain, first of all, just for our listeners who may not be familiar with that concept, can you explain the basics of that? And then I wanted to dig into some of the things around that with night owls and morning larks and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Super cool. Yeah. So, circadian rhythm. So what I mean when we say that is, really, any type of behavioral rhythm, physical, mental, behavioral changes, biological rhythms that follow a 24-hour cycle. So that's essentially what we mean when we say circadian, some kind of process that follows this 24-hour cycle and then restarts, every 24 hours.
Okay. And then when we talk about this night owls type thing, it seems like I recall seeing a study, and I can't quote the author or even the year, but they brought people out camping, night owls, people that consider themselves to be like, oh yeah, I stay up till 2 a.m. every night or whatever. And they had no artificial light, no phones, none of that stuff. And it seems like, if I remember the study right, almost all the individuals within just a few days realigned to the sun in some shape or form. Is that an outlier study, or is that like foundational?
Yeah, the super cool part is that study was done by one of my mentors, Ken Wright. He's a professor at CU Boulder, and he is like one of the world's most renowned experts in sleep and circadian rhythms. And no, it's not an outlier study. It really it shows you that when you remove artificial light, you can absolutely see clearly the effect of that, that exposure to natural light and its ability to kind of reset our circadian clocks. Sun light itself is the most powerful synchronizer of the human circadian system. So when you only have the sun, then people will reset to that every morning, as opposed to, being impacted by light at night and things like that.
And what about the person?
From screens, artificial light.
Right, yeah. Which we obviously have plenty of right now. What about the person that's listening to this and they're like, yeah. Doc, it's just not me. Like if I can't go to sleep before 12 or 1 a.m, I can't wake up. I can, but I'm miserable if I wake up before 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, or 9 or 10. What do you say to that person, or what tips do you have, or what reflection questions do you have for that person? Where do they go?
Yeah, that's funny because I'm sort of that person. Like, I'm a bad sleep researcher, actually, because exactly. What do they say? It's like spite sleeping or something like this, where it's finally the time I get to myself in the evenings to actually like do what I want to do. And, especially I think is a thing with moms for sure. If you have young kids. So that's when I'm doing my work and my episode watching. But anyway, I say, for someone who wants to change that, then, a really good first step would be to start manipulating light in the environment. So getting bright, as natural as possible, bright sunlight in the morning, and then limiting evening light. So like even though, like I said, I'm a naughty sleep researcher, but I won't turn my bathroom light on at night. Like I'll brush my teeth in the dark. So I would say probably most sleep researchers would tell you it's like most microbiologists are like really intense hand washers. That's like the sleep version of that, where we don't turn the light on. And you should hear me to my kids. I'm like, don't turn the light on for your teeth if they wake up in the night. So yeah. So I would say that's kind of an easy first step, is to start controlling the light, dim in the night, bright in the morning, and then kind of see where you go from there.
And let's take a step back to the why piece. So what if I'm saying, I'm good. Like, I don't want to change. I'm fine with this. It works with my life. I've worked my work schedule so it's not getting me fired or anything. I want to keep staying up till 1 and sleep until 10 or whatever. Is there a reason why I shouldn't continue to do that? Or is it like, you know what, that's personal preference, don't worry about it? Or is that person putting themselves at risk for some of these metabolic diseases and other things that you're finding?
Well, that's interesting, as you said, going to bed at 1 and waking up at 10. So I think actually if you can plan your external life and the responsibilities around that preferred sleep schedule, then that's probably ideal.
So it's okay if you're getting your 8 hours. It doesn't matter that it's not aligned with the sun or anything else. There's no health risk to that.
It depends. I mean, if you think about a shift worker, let's say, and this is where it gets really nuanced, because shift workers don't get enough sleep in addition to sleeping during the day. So we really don't know the exact reason why they have a heightened disease risk.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, but if your sleep is for the most part happening during the biological night, and you are getting that recommended, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, 7 hours or more, then we shouldn't see that increased disease risk if you are going to bed at 1 a.m. and waking up at 10, if that's really, kind of more natural for you. What's more problematic is, are people really sleeping until 10? Or are they actually getting up at 6 or 7 and cutting into that 7 hours minimum? So that's where we start to see that disease risk creep up.
So at this point, and obviously things change every week with the research, but at this point, if that person's getting 7 to 8 hours of seemingly quality sleep, they shouldn't have concerns about increased risk of ABC.
Correct. Compared to people who are sleeping, for example,
10 to
less
5.
than 7.
Or how about compared to people that are sleeping 10 to 6 in the morning? So same 8 hours, but instead of 10 to 6, this person's sleeping 2 to 10.
That's an interesting question that I almost don't want to answer, because there could be so many other things going on. For example, are they eating at night? Yeah. So that's a whole other topic, right? That you probably had, the experts on, where they, have found that people who eat later tend to also be, have higher risk for obesity and more body fat. Right. So it sort of all depends on kind of what other behaviors are going along with that. Are they eating late and then going to bed at 1 or 2 in the morning? Then there would be an increased risk compared to people who stop eating, earlier in the evening. Got it.
So the person, if I'm sitting out there in the audience and I'm a 2 a.m.er, but I get my 8 hours, if I can look you in the eye and say, I am not eating Cheetos or drinking another glass of whiskey or another can of beer, if I can say those things, then you would say, from what we know now, barring additional or poorer food choices and or alcohol soda choices, you are probably going to be okay.
You're probably okay.
All right.
Yeah.
That's good.
From a sleep duration perspective, yes, I would say that's probably, you're doing okay.
Okay, good. All right. Your sleep lab at CSU, at Colorado State University, basis for a lot of what we'll discuss today is state of the art, but I don't get it. Like, I think about, I've not been to your sleep lab yet. Maybe we'll have to arrange that at some point. But when I travel, even though I'm in not a nice hotel, but I'm in a good hotel, good temperature, it's reasonably quiet, I still don't sleep very well on the first night. Like, everything's great. So now I sit in a lab where there are like people watching me, and this is super weird. How do we get any good, how does this work? How does the sleep lab work to get some reasonable data when I can't even get it to work in a hotel room?
Right. So You're totally right. I mean, there's always going to be a phenomenon called the first night effect, which is not just anecdotal. There's actually been some really cool research that's been done that part of your brain actually remains more aroused when you
like
sleep in a new environment.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably exactly right. It's sort of, they call it a night watch.
Yeah.
And so you have half of your brain, and it was this really cool paper just a couple of years ago in Current Biology. And they showed that this first night effect is a real biological phenomenon. So how we account for that, just like you mentioned, well, number one, our lab looks like a hotel room. So hopefully it looks like one of those nice hotel rooms. So it doesn't.
Can we get room service? How does that work?
You actually will get room service. It's called my PhD students. They're making your food. Yes. Or me, I'm the room service. So yeah, so basically that's why it's designed the way it is to reduce some of the first night effects that you would get if you were, for example, sleeping on a hospital floor, right? Like there's first night effect in the hotel for sure. That can be even more pronounced when you are in a hospital room and there's codes being called and there's beeps, and the bed has an anti-bed sore mechanism, so it vibrates every hour. There can be all these issues. Yeah. So we're still going to see that first night effect in the sleep lab for sure, even though it looks like a hotel room. So the way we account for that is we use the first night in the lab as an acclimatization night. Okay. Because we know that that's going to happen. So there's some evidence that you should see less of that on the second night. So that's sort of how we mitigate it somewhat. We're probably never going to get rid of it completely unless we go into people's houses and do sleep studies, which
that could be weird too.
Unheard of.
Oh, is that right?
It could be weird. Yeah. Actually, there's a lab at CU Boulder, and they do sleep in kids. So instead of having the kids come to the lab, which would be, kind of difficult, they actually make your house into a sleep lab. It's really, really cool.
Huh. Mm-hmm. Very cool. All right, you've studied manipulating the timing of things like food intake and exercise. What did you find with those and any other related components that you may have mixed into those studies or that series of studies?
Yeah, so all of that timing of behaviors investigations is very, very new. I can tell you a little bit about it. Some of it's not published, but I don't mind telling you anyway. But basically we asked the question for the exercise part of it. We said, are people who exercise protected from some of the negative impairments of short sleep? And kind of a tongue-in-cheek reason we decided to go after that study is people are constantly asking me at talks, what if I get up early to run? Right. And of course I'm like, I know what you're asking. Right. You're the person that's getting up and running. So they're wondering if they're okay. And so we did that exact study. We recruited people who were sedentary non-exercisers. Then we also recruited a group of people who were regular runners. And we did the exact same thing to both groups. We sleep restricted them. They lived in the lab. And then we test how well their body responds to glucose. And it does look like the exercisers were somewhat protected, but they were still significantly impaired as far as their ability to handle the glucose. So, my evil scientist conclusion of that is even exercise isn't powerful enough to protect you from the effects of sleep loss. And exercise is more effective at helping the body handle glucose than the number one diabetes medication out there. It's the absolute most insulin sensitizing behavior you can do, and it still can't beat sleep.
Wow. There's a testimonial for you.
It's pretty cool. I know.
And we still can't get off our phones. All right. So cognitive elements. I've got a laundry list from one of your research studies here about it affects optimal memory, learning, cognition, mental health, elevated risk of depression, dementia, Alzheimer's. That'll get people's attention. Anxiety. And you already mentioned today, car crashes. A lot of stuff I just threw out, like 8 things. Just take us through some of these and what you're seeing and what we're learning and anything that are tied to these that might grab our attention. I'm hoping, and I'm guessing most of the people listening to this are probably prioritizing their sleeping, but maybe their coaching clients aren't, or their friends aren't, or whatever. So help us build that case on why these, I mean, I read that list and I go, oh my gosh, I got to sleep. So walk us through some of those.
So, I mean, you did, that was a gorgeous job.
It was your research study. So I don't get any credit. I'm just reading off your study.
No. And I, really my research focuses on metabolic tissue. So the real experts are like Ken Wright, who I mentioned is like the expert in, cognition and memory impairments. But really, I mean, there's no amount of sleep loss that people can actually adapt to, if that makes sense. So there was a really cool study. It came out of Penn, and they looked at the impairment in reaction time at different levels of insufficient sleep. So going from I don't remember the exact numbers, but going from sufficient sleep, maybe like 9-10 hours in bed, all the way down to, total sleep deprivation. And there was no level of sleep loss at which people kind of adapted. So there was, though, this interesting phenomenon where people stopped reporting feeling like the sleepiness report plateaued.
Huh.
So that's
your subjective,
kind of start to see the danger. Exactly.
And that's your subjective self-assessment of how rested am I. So at 8 hours, I'm good. At 6 hours, I'm like, At 5 hours, I'm more. But 4, 3, I'm like, you know what? It hasn't changed.
Exactly. It's sort of not getting any worse, but also they looked at it over time. So like, let's say you go from 9 hours to 5 hours of sleep per night, and you feel super sleepy the first night, like even more sleepy the next night, even more sleepy. At some point that plateaus and your reaction time keeps getting worse, but your subjective sleepiness has kind of plateaued.
Wow.
Exactly. So that's, in a lot of cases, that's like how people are living in the real world, where they no longer have a comparison to how they felt when they were fully rested. And that's where you kind of see the danger, because that's where the people are saying, hey, I'm fine. You're like, okay. But if you were driving in a warm car for 2 hours, that's like, are you really fine? Or are you at high risk of falling asleep and having a car accident?
Seems like I saw something a couple of years ago where they were looking at a DUI type of device or measurement tool for sleep. Is that gone anywhere? Have you heard anything about that?
I mean, it's definitely, there's always interest in a device that could measure sleepiness, like objective sleepiness, to help tell you, or especially if you're, for example, like a truck driver, try to tell you when it's time to take a nap before, any event. I mean, I don't know of anything that actually exists right now that can do it, but the research is always ongoing, I think, for that. I mean, there's like things with eye blinks. You can start to get a feel for like the duration of an eye blink as people are falling asleep driving.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit to the students out there. You're a professor. Our son's in med school. I swear his secret weapon has been he is stuck to a regular sleep schedule all through undergrad, all through med school, and it's worked well for him. But a lot of his peers, a lot of people that you and I teach or interact with are like, no, I gotta do an all-nighter, or, this is finals week, so I've got to go from my normal 8 down to 5 because I got to get that. What message do you have for these folks about retention, about being able to pull that out when they are actually sitting in that exam or presenting their dissertation or whatever it might be? What can you tell us? You're the go-to person on this stuff. What's the reality?
Yeah, the reality for sure is that you are more likely to retain and consolidate that studying and all that work you did if you sleep, essentially. So a lot of work out of Harvard, one of my collaborators there, Bob Stickgold, has done laid the foundation of this work and really has shown that sleep is extremely important for memory consolidation. And so, exactly that question, if a student asks me, well, should I pull an all-nighter or should I study until this time and then sleep? I'll always say, oh yeah, you should get the sleep.
And yet, I'm mid-50s. I've been out of undergrad for 35 years or something now. That's scary to say out loud. It was a thing then, and it's a thing now. Where is the disconnect? I mean, you're around professors every day. You're around students every day. Why is this message not getting across? If our goal is to not just retain it for life, but actually pass the test, we're not doing the main thing to allow us to meet our main goal. I just, it's stunning. Any not research based, but just personal insights from what's going on?
I mean, I guess, people don't do the experiment on themselves to see the differences, right? So the trade-off is, well, I will study more if I stay awake, right. Like I'll have those hours. And I think kind of what you said, the goal is maybe to pass the test, not necessarily to retain. And so acutely that might work, but if your expectation is to retain any of that kind of down the road, that's where you get in trouble. But yeah, I guess they make the trade-off, the hours equals studying or sleep, and they choose studying.
Yeah. The last week instead of the whole semester.
Right.
All right. You mentioned shift workers. You've done some research with them. They don't have the choice. Like that's my job. I worked in the warehouse during college. I would work. I think we started at 10 and wrapped up at 6 in the morning. And then they were really nice because Friday night they'd let us have off. So we'd have to come in Saturday morning. So just as you start to get your sleep working, you had to shift on Saturday every single week. So anyway, not complaining about my old bosses. You guys were awesome, but you're working with these folks. They don't have a choice. This is their job. What can they be doing? What are some practical things without quitting their job to help minimize these risk factors?
That is exactly what I want to know too. And that's the whole direction of kind of where we're headed with our research is right now, there is no strategy, which I think is irresponsible, like for people, including myself, to ask my students to do this shift work and not have the ability to say, oh, and by the way, this is this other thing you can do to kind of protect your health while you're doing this thing that we know is, impairing you. I mean, you could say that sleep and circadian misalignment is a carcinogen even. So it's like, what can we do? I know it's great. I'm like, ugh, I don't think I'm the first person that said that. So,
well, if you are, copyright that doggone thing.
No, I think I did read that a paper that said light pollution at night is a carcinogen. Anyway, so that's exactly what we're thinking about now is given the schedule of a night shift worker, like what can they do to minimize some of this risk? And one of the things we think they could do is take food intake out of the nighttime period. So that's exactly what we're doing now. I mean, they can't not be awake at night. That's sort of inherent in the job. They're usually active, meaning, up and walking around at night. That's also not something we can change. But could we change eating at night? Given all this recent research that the later you eat, is associated with higher risk for metabolic disease and cardiovascular disease, could we actually, without changing food intake and without changing the daytime sleep, could we actually just push eating outside of the nighttime period and kind of push that into the day? So that's a study we're doing now to test that. And we want to move that into the field and partner with some companies actually in Fort Collins that we can actually say, hey, could you mention to your third shift employees that we have this study to kind of test this in the real world?
And then when you say food, are we almost like on an intermittent fasting rule that you can have water, black coffee only, tea only? Can they have those types of things? Is it just no fat, protein, carb, alcohol during that time, or what track are you going?
We would still allow water for sure, definitely water intake. But yes, pushing any calorie containing energy, anything ingested with calories outside of that nighttime period.
Okay.
And we'll go, for our first pass at this, we'll really try to make it extreme to see if it works. And then maybe we can think about, well, is it certain macronutrients that shouldn't be consumed overnight, like carbs, for example? So there can be ways we make it maybe a little more feasible down the road. But as a first step, I think we'll try to go, full force, nothing except water overnight and see how that looks.
A few years ago, I had a chance to compete in the Race Across America bike race. So it took us 7 days. So in 7 days, we're traveling 3,000 miles between two of us. So obviously sleep is one of those competitive advantages, disadvantages. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. The approach we took, I had a teammate, there were two of us, is we would try to optimize as best we could within the constraints, but we would try to get 4 to 5 hours of sleep each at night. So somebody else is there's always somebody riding. So as Jerry's riding, I'm trying to get that 4 or 5 hours, and then we'll switch. And we would lose mileage on our competitors because the person that is on the bike is trying to hang in there for 4 or 5 hours while that other person does get the sleep. But then as the race progressed, we started to catch these other teams. I have a theory that that's why, because we're not superstar athletes. We were probably all pretty equal that were out there, but they continued to try to go on 2-hour shifts, 1-hour shifts, 3-hour shifts tops. And we were trying to go 4 to 5. And so we were losing on them early and then crushing them in the last 3 or 4 days of the race. Is that, what would be your thoughts on that? Don't take my prejudice. Is that consistent with what you'd expect? Do you think there's a better strategy? What would you advise, knowing the little tiny bit that I shared with you there?
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. Also very, such a specific population of people that would be doing kind of that overnight exercise. My family did the Hood to Coast relay race one year. So kind of similar, and also actually it's the Get Your Over the Pass. The one from, So anyway, I don't want to swear on your podcast.
Well, it's a donkey. It's a donkey. Get your donkey over the pass, everyone.
Exactly. But anyway, so no, I think that makes sense what you said, because, consolidating sleep we would hypothesize give you the most restoration and benefits, as opposed to trying to sleep in pieces, which we know that sleep disruption, even when the duration is the same, is actually associated with a lot of impairments. So that makes total sense. You were basically reducing sleep disruption compared to the other groups.
Got it. Okay. Just curious. Okay, I was really interested. One of your studies, and maybe most of them, looked at 9 hours versus 5 hours. When I did my PhD work on mental toughness, we used the same constraints, 9 hours and 5 hours for our sleep study. Oh, cool. So I don't know if that's just we were lucky and we happened to overlap. But that aside, what were some of your key findings in looking at those two, not extremes, but pseudo extremes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the primary findings that have come out of my work and our lab's work are that when you let people have 9 hours time in bed, they look very healthy metabolically. And then you take those same exact young, lean, healthy people and put them through this 5-hour sleep per night protocol, or I should say 5 hours time in bed. They start to look pre-diabetic in a lot of different ways. And it's done in a randomized order. So that's another way we get around that first night effect, is it should be kind of equal in either condition. But they don't do as well clearing glucose from the body. We see increases in the hunger hormone ghrelin. We see changes in free fatty acids. So free fatty acids are increased overnight when people don't get enough sleep. And in some of those studies, we also took tissue biopsies. So we took fat biopsies and actually can show from the fat cell that there is a metabolic impairment in those young, healthy, lean people. When they don't get enough sleep, their fat cells themselves don't even respond as well to insulin. So it really shows that this you can have this behavioral change that then has a cellular impact, which I think is super cool.
And let's just reinforce for folks, and I don't know the answer to this, but I have a guess. We're not talking 6 months or 5 years of this sleep pattern. This is a 5-day study or something along those lines, right?
Yes. And you can see these changes in as little as one night, actually.
Oh my gosh.
One night of partial sleep loss, one night of total sleep loss. I did a study in dogs where we actually did one night of total sleep deprivation before the animals went on to do a high fat feeding study as part of a different question. After one night of total sleep deprivation, they were impaired metabolically as much as after nine months on a high fat diet.
Wow.
It was striking. Yeah, it was terrifying.
Wait, we got to say that out loud one more time. So one night of restricted sleep was equal to, at least in dogs, equal to 9 months of a fat focused diet, a high fat diet.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
It was crazy. And I was the one sleep depriving those dogs, me and my students. Aww. So I was pretty sad. I
got to keep our Australian Shepherd away from you. What about waking in the middle of the night? Again, mid-50s, it's guaranteed almost every night for me, almost all of my friends, males especially. Mm-hmm. Any tips for that, getting back to sleep? I know that's not the focus of your research, but in your reading, in your interactions, any guidance that you can give our audience that might be in a similar situation?
Yes. But first I want to say this is a huge issue in women also. So
my wife doesn't have any trouble. I don't know what's going on there. I'm very jealous.
Wow. Oh, that's incredible. I was surprised when you said that because mostly I have women asking me that question of how to get back to sleep.
Okay. Good. So the whole audience now.
Yeah. I mean, it's universal. Yeah. It's so universal. And I think the hardest part is the mental anxiety that comes with being awake at night and getting past that, where you start saying, if I go to sleep now, I'll get 3 more hours. And then you're just watching. And now, oh no, now it's going to be 2 hours. So, I mean, I don't know the answer and suffering from it the same as everybody. So I think maybe the only thing you can do is try to let go of some of the expectations surrounding it, like, and the anxiety of getting back to sleep. Sometimes I just say to myself, well, I'll go do something and I'll read. And you know what? Tomorrow I will sleep so well because I have built up a little bit of sleep debt. And sometimes that lets me just not fixate too much on it.
Let the stress go. It's not going to change the situation. Mm-hmm. Might as well let it go.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Quick side question. Your 9-hour time in bed, folks, we found in our study that, and we had very type AAA people in our study for obvious reasons, but so maybe it was different with them, but they complained of their quality was worse than normal because most of these were 7.5-hour folks. So they were laying there in bed going, oh, Brad's making me do this study. I got to stay here for 9 hours. And so they felt like the quality of those 9 hours was worse than their 7.5 to 8 typical. Did you get any of that kind of feedback? Is that anything you collected? Have you seen that in some of your research?
Well, how old were the people in your study?
They were masters athletes. So 40 to 50, generally 40 to 55.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So our actual upper age limit for most of our studies is 35 because you start to see changes in sleep architecture around that age. So in our people who are 18 to 35, we don't have that same complaint. People are typically able to, within 9 hours time in bed, they're getting maybe 8.5 sleep time. So I think, we know that sleep quality and quantity decrease with age. So in a group that has a lower sleep need, then certainly if people are in bed too long, you can, induce some insomnia, or maybe they're, like you said, maybe they're sleeping and then waking up and reporting some lower sleep quality. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just curious. Caffeine timing. Half-life is between 4 and 8 hours. 6-ish is pretty typical from what I've read. What do you recommend in terms of caffeine timing? The person that says, well, it doesn't, I have a very good friend that drinks coffee at dinner, and I'm just like, dude, how do you do that? He's like, it doesn't bother me at all. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you don't realize it. But what do you suggest? What's your recommendation? And how do you answer that question for the person that says, doesn't bother me?
Well, actually, I'll kind of go in reverse. The person that says it doesn't bother me, because I'm kind of that person also. I did a 23andMe, and I do actually, I've always said caffeine doesn't bother me that much. And sure enough, I have the SNP, the gene polymorphism to have very fast caffeine metabolism. Okay. So it doesn't bother me. People might actually have like something a genetic, they might really be a fast metabolizer. And so maybe it doesn't bother them as much. But as a rule of thumb, we usually say to stop drinking caffeine like 5 to 6 hours before bed. Some people say after 12 noon. So it's sort of kind of personal preference. But certainly if you're having issues falling asleep or staying asleep, it's something to consider. But if your friend who's drinking coffee at dinner, if he's not having any problem falling asleep, then maybe he doesn't really have to look at that.
And is there a difference between falling asleep and quality of sleep? I've seen some studies with caffeine that, yes, I can fall asleep, but then if you look at the depth of sleep, it's not the same with that caffeine in your system than it would be without it. Have you seen anything along those lines?
I haven't seen those studies, though I'm sure they exist, because that sounds, reasonable. Like a natural question. Yeah, that people would ask, and certainly a reasonable outcome. So I'd have to look that up. But there are some nap studies where they have people take a certain amount of caffeine before the nap so that by the time you wake up from the nap, it's actually, really working and kind of getting rid of some of that sleep inertia. So that would make sense then.
But there's some funny term for that.
Nappuccino.
Nappuccino. There we go.
Yes. I love it.
That's great. All right, just a couple more. I heard an interview you did about 14 months ago. You mentioned research was underway about whether increased sleep enhanced weight loss. Any updates over the last 14 months since you mentioned that? Because at the time you're like, well, we're just kind of getting started here. I was just curious, do we have any hot news off the line here?
Off the presses. That is an ongoing study. And I'll tell you that all clinical research has been really slowed down by COVID, as you can imagine. So no updates that I can speak to, but certainly plenty of, there's other existing study literature and studies that have been published that suggest that if you are a short sleeper because you're getting insufficient sleep, and you are able to extend sleep, there's improvements in metabolic outcomes. That's for sure. I think, there's been a couple of studies that have shown that. Extended sleep with a diet, I haven't seen those studies, but that would also be, in our studies, we're actually trying to hold weight constant. So we're just looking at the effects of increasing sleep duration on things like insulin sensitivity. But in the face of weight loss, I'd have to look and see if anything recently has been published. There was a study at the University of Chicago published in like the mid 2000s. That was when people who were attempting to diet, if they were getting insufficient sleep, their efforts were somewhat thwarted. And so they weren't losing as much weight as the people that were getting sufficient sleep.
Well, I'm thinking
so there's certainly evidence for that.
Well, and what you mentioned earlier about the connection with cognitive issues, memory, learning, mental health, cognition, et cetera. If I'm trying to be more specific with my eating, I'm going to eat less chips or less alcohol or whatever it might be that brings that into more of a streamlined situation with my healthy eating. If I'm not sleeping, it just seems logical that I'm going to be less consistent with that because I'm tired. I need more comfort food. I don't need, but totally. I feel like I need more comfort food. So it seems like even if it's not affecting things at the cellular level, it's going to affect objective measurements of activities. Choices that are made. Exactly.
Healthy food, exercise. I mean, if you're too tired to cook and you're too tired to go to the gym, you're right. It makes so much sense that you're not going to go to the gym and you're going to maybe go to the drive-through fast food or just order food, that's not necessarily as healthful, but also even the research shows that you get more reward, like from MRI studies, you actually have more activity in reward centers of your brain in response to unhealthy food when you're not getting enough sleep. So there's no avoiding the increased risk if you're not getting enough sleep.
So
coming at you from all angles.
Yeah, it lights up. Wow, that is super interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Last one's yours. Any things I haven't asked that you're like, oh, Brad, there's this new thing I got to tell you about? Anything that you'd love to get out there that hasn't come out from our first 45 minutes or so?
I'm like, somehow recruit subjects, people who want to do the study. No, I think the timing of eating is really our most exciting kind of new thing that we're trying to push forward and try to move that into the free living population. So that's, I would say, we talked about it, but I'm most excited about that.
And that's not just shift workers, because that's the context we spoke about that. You're talking about everyday person with a typical schedule. You're looking at differences in stopping eating at 6 versus that nighttime, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock snack, and the impact that can have on a variety of things.
Yes. And actually, I'm most interested in the shift work population. Actually, I think that's where it could have the biggest benefit.
Absolutely.
But we do definitely see changes in patterns of circulating factors just by shifting food intake. But you're right. In people who are sleeping normally, sleeping at night, we see changes. Yeah, for sure. But shift workers, I think that's where we could have the biggest impact.
Huge.
Because just like you said, that they have this increased risk and they can't necessarily just change their job.
Right.
So that's where I feel like we could have the most impact.
That's awesome. Dr. Broussard, what a privilege. This is fun.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Talk about a wake-up call. Outstanding insights from Dr. Josie Broussard. You can see now why we were excited to have her as our keynote speaker at the Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium in Estes Park this September. Thanks to you for tuning in for the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. If you enjoyed the podcast, you might enjoy our weekly, what we call the Catalyst 5. They're 5 very brief bullet points. They're different tricks, tips, research we've uncovered, words of encouragement, things that have enhanced our personal and professional lives. They come out every Tuesday in a format that, frankly, you'd probably read through in less than 60 seconds. But then we include links to more depth. So if there's more that you want to dig into, you can easily access that through the Catalyst 5. If you're interested in that, there's a link in the podcast description that allows you to tap into those. Next week's podcast episode is one we've been working on a very long time. It's with multiple best-selling author Steve Magnus. It's a fun chat that easily could have gone on for hours, but don't worry, we saved some hopefully for a future discussion. As always, feel free to reach out to us with any questions about your current or future coaching career. results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Or if you're an organization wanting to bring nationally board certified coaching into your organization, feel free to reach out as well. You'll find additional resources on health, wellness, and performance on the website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And now it's time to be a catalyst. This is Dr. Brad Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. I'll speak with you soon on another episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast, or maybe over at the YouTube coaching channel.